The wind had a bite that evening, the kind that carries memories you wish would stay buried. My hands trembled slightly as I reached the porch, balancing my crutch against the rail. It had been a long day of physical therapy, and all I wanted was a cup of tea in my favorite chair. I slipped my key into the front door, the same brass key I'd used for over 40 years, and it stopped halfway. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, tried again, pressed harder. Nothing. For a moment, I thought my hands were failing me. Age plays cruel tricks, you know. But no, the key wasn't wrong. The lock was. My heart started to pound, not from fear at first, but from disbelief. I tried the knob, it refused. I knocked. Once. Twice. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. When the door opened, Kendra stood there, my daughter-in-law, her smile too smooth to be kind. "Oh, Elara," she said lightly. "We changed the locks today for security." That word security hit harder than the cold air around me. I didn't know it then, but that was the day she declared silent war. The day she decided my home, my history was hers to claim. I stood there on that porch, staring at Kendra, as if she'd just spoken in another language. "Change the locks?" I asked softly. "Without telling me?" Her smile didn't move, but her eyes did. They measured me the way a buyer sizes up an old chair at an estate sale. "You've been so tired lately, Elara. I didn't want you to worry. We'll give you the new key tomorrow." Tomorrow. Such a small word. Yet in that single promise I heard every door in my life closing. I wanted to shout, to demand my own home back, but my voice betrayed me. My throat tightened, and all I could manage was a whisper. "This house was never locked to me." She tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "We just want you safe." Safe. I'd never felt less safe in my entire life. Have you ever trusted someone enough to hand them the keys to everything you love, only to realize they've changed the lock the moment you turned your back? If you have, you already know the kind of chill that settles in your chest. Subscribe before someone like Kendra changes your locks. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the windows glowing upstairs. My own home lit up, alive, and I was on the outside looking in. The house creaked the same way it always had, yet it no longer felt like mine. Every echo in those walls belonged to someone else now, someone smiling in my kitchen while I shivered on the porch. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, that Ethan would fix this in the morning, but deep down, something had shifted. When a person takes your key, they take more than metal and grooves, they take the right to belong. That's when I understood. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, disguised as kindness. Stories like this aren't rare, darlings. They happen every day to people who never saw it coming. Don't wait until someone changes your locks to realize how easily trust can be broken. Hit subscribe now, not for me but to protect yourself, to stay one story ahead of the next Kendra waiting in your life. And if you still don't believe it could happen to you, tell me why in the comments. I want to hear your reason, before you lose your key too. I remember gripping the cold edge of my steering wheel, staring at that locked door. For 40 years, it had been a doorway to warmth, laughter, and the smell of Theodore's morning coffee. That night, it became a wall between who I was and who I would have to become. The next morning, I acted normal. I smiled at Kendra, thanked her for breakfast, even told her the new locks looked modern. She believed it. She thought the old woman had finally surrendered. But what she didn't understand is that quiet doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes, silence is just the moment before thunder. People often ask me when it all started, when I decided to fight back. I tell them it was the second my own key failed me. That tiny piece of brass was more than a tool. It was a warning. Because when someone changes your lock, they're not just closing a door. They're testing how long you'll knock before you decide to take your house back. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about justice. Stay close, darling, because the real story begins when I stopped knocking. Before the locks changed and the silence grew heavy, my home was the one place where everything made sense. Theodore and I built it piece by piece, not through luxury, but through effort and laughter. He laid the floors himself, every plank a story, every nail a promise. I still remember the night we finished painting the living room. We were covered in streaks of white and blue, both of us too tired to stand but too proud to stop smiling. That house wasn't just wood and walls. It was where life unfolded, where our son took his first steps, where birthdays echoed through hallways that smelled of lemon cake and coffee. Theodore used to say, "A house isn't real until it holds your laughter." He was right. Even now, I can close my eyes and hear him humming in the garage, fixing something that wasn't broken just so he could stay busy. Those sounds, that rhythm, are what made the house feel alive. Would you ever sell the home you built your memories in? I couldn't. That's why what happened later cut so deeply. You can lose money and replace it. But when someone takes the place where your love still lives, there's no replacement for that. When Theodore passed, the house didn't feel empty right away. Grief moves slowly, the way dust settles after sunlight fades. For weeks, I still set 2 cups on the breakfast table. Habit is a stubborn companion. His chair stayed by the window, where he used to read the morning paper. Some days, I'd catch myself speaking to it, asking whether the rain would hold or if the tomatoes were ready to pick. I always imagined his gentle laugh answering back, telling me to check the garden anyway. Nights were the hardest. The house made new sounds I'd never noticed before. The gentle tick of the hallway clock, the soft shift of air through the vents. They weren't frightening. They were reminders that time hadn't stopped just because he did. People said I should move closer to family, sell the place, start somewhere fresh. But how do you abandon the walls that still know your heartbeat? Every mark, every photograph, every scratch on the banister was a sentence in the story we wrote together. I stayed, not because I couldn't leave, but because I wasn't ready to let the echoes die. Comment, home, if you've ever walked through a room and still felt someone you loved sitting there, even after they were gone. The seasons kept turning, even when I stopped marking the dates. Spring brought its tulips, summer its heavy light. I moved through the motions, watering plants, polishing the wood. Theodore had sanded by hand, pretending that care could replace company. The neighbors waved. I waved back. They saw a woman keeping busy, not the one who lingered by the phone at dusk, hoping to hear her son's voice. Ethan called less often after the wedding. I told myself it was normal that every son builds his own world, but there's a silence only a mother knows. It hums between the ticking of clocks. Still, I found comfort in the rituals. Each Sunday, I made tea for 2 and set 1 cup beside his photograph. "You'd laugh at how quiet it's gotten," I'd whisper. "Even the pipes miss you." The house, faithful as ever, held its peace. I began to see the home not as a relic, but as a companion. It watched me grow old without complaint. It carried every secret conversation I had with my past. And though time softened the ache, it never erased it. Some nights, I caught myself listening, as if love itself might walk back through the door, wearing the same old flannel, and asking what was for dinner. In those quiet years, I didn't know I was guarding something others would one day try to claim. The years alone taught me how to fill silence with small sounds. A kettle's whistle, the click of knitting needles, the soft creak of a rocking chair, they were my background music. I thought that if I kept the rhythm steady enough, nothing would change again. Before he passed, Theodore made me promise one thing: don't let anyone take what we built. At the time, I thought he meant the bricks and beams. Now I know he meant the life inside them, the dignity, the memories, the quiet pride of calling something your own. I kept that promise. When the roof leaked, I patched it. When the pipes rattled, I found a neighbor's boy to tighten them. I paid the taxes early, tended the garden every spring, and left Theodore's tools exactly where he'd last placed them. That was my way of keeping us alive. Some evenings I would sit by the window, watching porch lights flicker on across the street, and whisper, "We did well, didn't we?" The house answered with warmth only I could feel. So, when Ethan called to ask if he and his wife could stay for a while, I said yes. I thought it would be nice to have laughter in the house again. I thought sharing space was the same as sharing love. I didn't realize I was unlocking the door for the very storm Theodore had warned me about. It was a Tuesday morning when the phone rang, the kind of morning where the sun feels soft and forgiving. I was pruning the roses out front, humming the same tune Theodore used to play on the harmonica, when I heard Ethan's voice on the line. "Mom," he said, almost hesitant, "we've hit a rough patch. Kendra lost her job, and my project's on hold. Could we stay with you for a while?" For a moment, my heart lifted. The house had been too quiet for too long. I didn't hear trouble in his voice. I heard possibility. The thought of sharing breakfast again, of hearing someone laugh from the hallway, felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. "Of course, darling," I said. "You don't even have to ask." After we hung up, I stood by the window looking out over the yard. It felt right, almost like the house itself sighed in relief, ready to feel alive again. Still, a tiny voice in me whispered caution. Something about Kendra's polite smiles at holidays always felt too polished, too practiced. But love for Ethan drowned it out. Have you ever ignored your gut feeling because you wanted to believe in family? They arrived on a bright Saturday morning, their car packed with boxes that seemed to multiply every time one was unloaded. Kendra stepped out first, wearing a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. She handed me a bouquet of lilies. "For you, Elara. You've kept this place so lovely." I took the flowers, inhaling the faint scent that reminded me of hospital rooms and new beginnings. "You're both welcome here," I told them, and I meant it. For a moment, everything felt simple again. Ethan carried in the heavier boxes, chatting about work and plans for the future. His energy filled the rooms that had been too still for too long. I could almost feel the walls breathe again. That first night, the house echoed with footsteps, laughter, and the faint clatter of dishes. It was comforting, like hearing a familiar song after years of silence. Kendra complimented every corner of the house, running her fingers over the banister Theodore had carved. "You really kept this in perfect shape," she said, voice sweet but assessing. "It must take a lot out of you." "Oh, it keeps me busy," I replied with a small laugh, not realizing that even then, she was measuring what she could one day claim. I went to bed that night, smiling, believing peace had returned. I had no idea that small compliments can sometimes be the first bricks in a wall you'll later have to tear down with your own hands. The first few weeks passed gently enough. Kendra insisted on cooking dinner, saying she wanted me to rest. I was grateful at first. It felt nice to sit at the table and have someone else lift the heavy pans. Her meals were good, tidy, organized, efficient. Yet the kitchen slowly stopped smelling like mine. The spice jars I kept above the stove were rearranged by label and height, not by memory. Even my favorite chipped mug disappeared, replaced by a matching set she'd brought from the city. "It looks cleaner this way," she said one afternoon, gesturing proudly toward the neatly stacked shelves. I nodded, though something inside me resisted. It was still my kitchen, but it no longer greeted me the same way. Ethan didn't notice. He was working longer hours again, grateful to see his wife and mother getting along. "You two are keeping the house alive," he said, kissing us both on the forehead before leaving for a late meeting. I smiled after him, but when the door closed, the quiet changed. Kendra stood by the window, scrolling through her phone, the sound of her nails tapping the screen steady and deliberate. I realized then how carefully she had begun to occupy every corner of this home. I told myself not to overthink it. Family helps family, that's how I was raised. But sometimes, help doesn't arrive with open arms. Sometimes it moves in quietly, waits until you relax, and then starts changing the rules you thought were unshakable. One evening, as the sun folded into the trees, Kendra joined me on the porch. The light hit her hair just right. It almost made her look angelic. She smiled and said, "You should rest more, Elara. Let us take care of things now. You've done enough." There was tenderness in her tone, but also a strange finality. "You've done enough." The words clung to me long after she went inside. For decades, this house had been the shape of my effort, the proof of my keeping every promise Theodore and I made. How does one stop doing enough in a home built on doing? That night, I walked through each room, touching the furniture we had chosen together. Every piece carried a story. Yet as I moved from wall to wall, I felt like a guest touring a museum of her own life. I told myself this was only adjustment, a new rhythm, new voices, but deep down, something old in me stirred, uneasy and alert. Ethan still looked at Kendra with the kind of trust that blinds a man to small changes. I couldn't fault him. Love often sounds like agreement. I kept my worries quiet, believing that silence would keep the peace. Have you ever trusted someone you shouldn't have, just because admitting the truth would break your heart? Hit like if you've ever trusted someone you shouldn't have, because the day you start questioning that trust is the day the story of your life begins to change. It started with furniture. Little changes at first so small, I almost thanked her for them. "The couch looks better here," Kendra said one morning, pushing it away from the fireplace. "More space for sunlight." I nodded, watching her drag what Theodore had built by hand across the floorboards. The scrape made a sound that reached right through me. Later, I found that she'd moved the family portraits from the hallway to a box in the attic. "I'll dust them and bring them back," she promised. They never returned. The dining table, once centered beneath the chandelier, was turned sideways to fit the flow of her new decor. Even the clock that had ticked in our living room for 40 years was replaced by something sleek and silver, quiet, digital, soulless. She called it updating. I called it vanishing, one memory at a time. Ethan noticed the brightness, but not the loss. "Kendra's got such an eye for order," he said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. I smiled back. Because when someone you love is blind, you learn not to point at what they can't see. Have you ever watched someone slowly erase your place in your own home? It doesn't happen in a storm. It happens in a whisper. Once the furniture settled in its new places, the rules began. At first, they sounded like suggestions. "You shouldn't climb the stairs too often, Elara. It's not safe. Don't bother folding laundry. I'll handle it, you might hurt your hip." Each word was coded in care, yet every kindness came with a new restriction. My world grew smaller by the day. I used to wake early, make coffee, and sit on the porch to watch the sun lift over the neighborhood. Kendra began locking the screen door at night and keeping the key in her room. "Just for safety," she said again. The mail started arriving in neat piles on the counter already opened. "You get so many confusing letters," she explained. "It's easier if I sort them first." Ethan smiled when he heard that. "She's just being helpful, Mom." I nodded, swallowing the ache that rose in my throat. Love, I've learned, is quiet, even when it hurts. It doesn't argue, it waits. Some evenings, I'd hear Kendra on the phone, her voice low and confident, talking about our home to her friends. The phrase twisted something inside me. Our home. I wanted to correct her, to remind her that she was living in a story I had written long before she arrived, but every time I tried to speak, Ethan's tired eyes silenced me. I began to keep a notebook, small details, small changes. Not because I planned to fight, but because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. I started noticing that certain doors no longer opened when I turned the handle. The upstairs guest room where I kept Theodore's old photo albums was always locked now. Kendra claimed she was storing seasonal items there and didn't want the clutter disturbed. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway, I tried the knob again. It held firm. That quiet click of denial told me more than any words could. The woman who'd once walked into my home with lilies now guarded my memories like they were contraband. The subtle restrictions kept growing. She rearranged the pantry, labeling every jar. "So you don't get confused," she said. My medicine cabinet was reorganized, my appointments suddenly rescheduled without my knowledge. She even replaced my old cordless phone with a sleek model I couldn't figure out how to use. "Technology is easier this way," she insisted. It was around that time I began hearing my name mentioned behind closed doors. At first, it was only muffled tones, a pause when I entered, a lowered voice when I passed the hallway. Then, one night, I caught Kendra saying, "She doesn't even know what day it is half the time." I stepped quietly back into my room, my pulse steady but heavy. That's when I understood she wasn't just moving furniture or taking control of routines. She was writing a new version of me. One that sounded frail, forgetful, easy to push aside. It's a strange thing to watch your reflection being repainted by someone else. You start to question which image is real, the one in the mirror, or the one they tell others to see. The final shift came quietly, like all the others. One morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Kendra's tidy script. "Please ring the bell before coming into the living room. Ethan and I need our privacy in the mornings." I stared at the words for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Ring the bell in my own house. I left the note where it was, too tired to argue, too stunned to accept. Over time, the house began to feel divided, their space and mine. The living room was hers, the den was theirs, the porch lights switched off before I could enjoy the evening air. Even my favorite armchair was replaced with something ergonomic, She called it a gift. It felt like eviction, wrapped in courtesy. I tried to talk to Ethan once. "Son," I said, "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home." He looked at me with that patient smile reserved for the elderly. "Mom, Kendra's just trying to make things easier for everyone." That was when I realized she didn't need to raise her voice or make demands. She already had his trust. And when someone controls trust, they don't need permission to control everything else. That evening, I stood in the hallway, my shadow stretching along walls that no longer seemed to recognize me. The scent of Kendra's perfume lingered everywhere, faint but inescapable proof of her quiet conquest. Stay with me, because what she did next still chills me. That Thursday started like any other. I had my morning tea, folded a small load of laundry, and left for my physical therapy session downtown. The sun was kind, and for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. My therapist said I was walking stronger, that maybe soon I could leave the cane behind. The drive home was peaceful. I hummed to myself, thinking I might bake something for Ethan's dinner. The smell of bread always used to soften his mood. I remember smiling at that thought, how simple love used to be. When I turned onto my street, I noticed the porch light was off. Strange. Kendra never forgot details like that. I parked, gathered my bag, and climbed the steps slowly, the old wood creaking under my weight. I reached for my key, the same brass one Theodore had cut decades ago, and slid it into the lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned, tried again, wiggled it gently. Nothing. The key wouldn't turn. I pulled it out, rubbed my fingers along the grooves, and tried once more. Still locked. A familiar chill ran through my chest, the kind that doesn't come from weather but from realization. I knocked lightly, then harder. Through the glass panel beside the door, I saw movement, a shadow passing through the hallway. My hallway. The door opened just enough for Kendra to stand framed in the gap, her hand resting on the knob as if she owned the air between us. "Oh, Elara," she said with a light smile. "You startled me. We had the locks changed this morning." My breath caught. "Change the locks? Why would you do that?" "Security," she replied smoothly. "You know the neighborhood isn't what it used to be. We can't be too careful." I looked past her shoulder. The house was spotless, almost sterile. Even the old rug by the doorway, the one Theodore and I bought on our 10th anniversary, was gone. "You didn't tell me," I whispered. "You didn't even call." She shifted her weight, that polite expression never breaking. "You've been forgetful lately. I didn't want to worry you with details. We'll get you a new key tomorrow." Tomorrow. That same word again. "Kendra," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is still my home." "Of course," she answered, but her tone carried finality. "Ethan and I are only looking out for you." The door stayed half closed between us. I stood on the porch, hands trembling, the air heavy with all the words I wanted to say and didn't. What would you do if your own house locked you out? The question rolled through my mind like thunder, but I kept my face calm. I wouldn't let her see the hurt, not yet. I stepped back from the doorway and said softly, "Good night, Kendra." I didn't leave right away. I sat down on the top step, the wood cool beneath my palms. The sun had already slipped behind the houses across the street, leaving a thin silver line of light over the rooftops. Inside, I could hear muffled laughter, Kendra's sharp and deliberate, Ethan's weary but gentle. I told myself I'd wait until he came to the door, that he'd open it, that he'd see me sitting there and everything would make sense again. But time moved differently that evening. The porch light stayed dark. No one came. The neighbors passed by, offering polite waves. I smiled back, pretending I was simply enjoying the fresh air. Pride is a strange thing. It keeps you sitting straight even when your heart wants to collapse. The night grew colder. I reached for the railing to steady myself, staring at the door that had once meant safety. Now it stood quiet, unwelcoming, almost unfamiliar. I thought about Theodore, about the promise I made to keep what we built safe. I wondered what he would have said if he saw me sitting there, locked out of the life we created. By the time Ethan finally opened the door, his expression was full of confusion, not understanding. "Mom, what are you doing out here?" "The lock wouldn't turn," I said simply. He looked at Kendra, then back at me, his brows knitting. "I'll fix it in the morning." Morning again, always morning. as if the dark didn't count, as if this humiliation could be postponed like a chore. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house seemed to travel through the walls, the whisper of voices, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the closing of a cabinet somewhere down the hall. I lay there in the small guest room that now felt like a borrowed space, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand when the line had been crossed. By morning, Kendra had already prepared breakfast. She greeted me with the same easy tone as if nothing had happened. "You must have been confused last night," she said, sliding a plate toward me. "The locksmith came earlier than expected." I nodded, though the words stung. Confused. That was the story now. It sounded harmless, even caring, but it carried a quiet verdict. I looked at Ethan across the table. He smiled weakly, trusting her explanation because love makes liars sound believable. He didn't see the way her hand brushed the new keys on the counter, 3 of them. None for me. I understood then that the door hadn't been locked by mistake. It was a message written in metal. "You're welcome here, but not in control." My hands shook as I reached for my cup, but I forced a smile. She wanted me to break. I wouldn't give her that. Comment, unbelievable, if this made your blood boil. Because no wound cuts deeper than being told you don't belong in the very place you built with your own hands. And that morning, I realized she wasn't just moving in, she was moving me out. The days that followed blended together, each one wrapped in a politeness that felt more like control than care. "Don't worry about cooking, Elara," Kendra would say with a smile that left no room for argument. "You should rest. You've done enough." The phrase "you've done enough" became her favorite refrain. It sounded gentle, almost loving, but beneath it was an invisible leash. Every time she said it, another small part of my freedom vanished. She began bringing meals to my room instead of letting me eat at the table. "It's easier this way," she claimed. My coffee came pre-sweetened, my medicine already measured out. Decisions that once belonged to me were now made for me. I noticed the door to the backyard was always locked. The key was gone from its hook. I told myself it was for safety, though I hadn't needed protection for 40 years. Each evening, Kendra would stop by my door, her voice soft but firm. "Do you need anything before bed?" I always answered, "No, thank you," because saying yes would mean accepting her rule. Could you survive being treated like a stranger in your own home? It's a question that echoes differently once you realize kindness can be used as a cage. My mornings no longer belonged to me. Kendra had arranged everything into what she called a manageable routine. She handled my medication, sorted my mail, and managed the groceries. I wasn't allowed to go out alone, just until you're fully stable, she'd remind me. The phone line was rerouted to her mobile. I discovered that the hard way when I tried to call Vivian one afternoon. The call didn't go through. A soft beep, then silence. Later, Kendra smiled and said, "I had it set up for efficiency, no more confusing buttons." Efficiency. Such a tidy word for something so cruel. I started counting the number of times I was told what I could or couldn't do. Don't climb those stairs. Don't answer the door. Don't overthink things. The word "don't" became the sound of my mornings, my afternoons, my nights. She even placed cameras, little white circles with blinking lights in the hallway for security. Ethan installed them himself, proud of his handiwork. He never saw how my hands trembled when the first one blinked above the kitchen door. To keep from disappearing completely, I began small rebellions. I would leave my light on an extra hour past her bedtime. I'd move a vase slightly to the left, a quiet reminder that this was still my house, still my life. They were tiny victories, barely visible, but they kept me sane. Because when everything is taken from you, control over even an inch of space can feel like freedom. One evening, after Kendra had gone to bed, I stood in the hallway staring at the locked pantry door. The hunger wasn't only for food, it was for something that was mine again. That night I made a decision. Upstairs, in the small study where I once kept Theodore's books, I cleared a space. I brought up an electric kettle, a tiny fridge I'd found in the attic, and a few dry goods I'd managed to buy during my physical therapy trips. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I called it my small kitchen. There, I made instant oatmeal in secret and brewed tea in quiet defiance. I'd sit by the window, cup in hand, feeling the warm air from outside slip through the cracks. Those few moments were the only parts of the day that truly belonged to me. I became careful, deliberate with every movement. I waited until I heard Kendra's door close before I turned on the kettle. I wiped the counters twice to hide any trace of my late-night rebellion. To an outsider, it might seem silly, an old woman making tea in the dark, but to me, it was proof that I still existed beyond her rules. Sometimes I'd whisper to Theodore's photo on the shelf, "We're still here, love. We're still standing." It wasn't survival in the usual sense. It was quiet resistance. Every cup of tea, every hidden meal, was a small declaration that I hadn't surrendered, not yet. In that dim little room, surrounded by memories and silence, I began to feel something stir again. Not anger, not fear, but strength. The kind that waits for the right moment to breathe. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind that starts too quietly. I had just finished my secret cup of tea when I heard raised voices downstairs, Ethan and Kendra arguing. Their words were sharp but muffled, drifting up through the floorboards. "She's your mother, Ethan," Kendra snapped. "But she can't keep making things difficult. You have to set boundaries." "She's not doing anything wrong," he said, but his voice wavered. I could tell he wasn't sure whom he believed anymore. I sat perfectly still, my heart steady but heavy. It was strange, after all the silence, hearing my own existence debated like a problem to solve. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. That afternoon, I left my room and walked into the kitchen while Kendra was rearranging cabinets again. She turned, startled. "Elara, you should be resting." "No," I said simply, the words steady in my throat. "I think I've rested enough." She blinked, unsure how to respond. It was the first time I'd pushed back without raising my voice. She quickly smiled, dismissive, and turned back to her task. But the shift had already happened. She felt it. I felt it. That night, I wrote 3 lines in my notebook. "They think I'm trapped. They forget I built the cage. And I still hold the map. Subscribe if you believe no one should treat their elders this way. Because strength doesn't always roar sometimes. It sits quietly, waiting, letting others believe they've won. Until the moment comes when silence turns into strategy." It started with a phone call. I almost didn't answer. The landline had become more of a decoration than a tool lately, but when it rang that morning, something told me to pick it up. "Elara?" The voice was warm, familiar, Vivian's. She'd been my closest friend since our church choir days, long before Kendra entered our lives. "Vivian, I didn't expect to hear from you," I said, steadying my voice. "Honey, are you all right?" Her tone changed, cautious, almost nervous. "I saw something at work today, and I can't shake it." Vivian worked at the county probate office. She dealt with property filings and estate paperwork. I knew that much, but we hadn't spoken in months. "What did you see?" I asked. "A deed," she said quietly. "Your address. It's under review for ownership transfer." It listed Kendra as the primary occupant. My fingers tightened around the receiver. That can't be right. I thought so too. But, Elara, it had your signature on it. The world tilted a little then. I sat down slowly, the cord twisting between my fingers. Vivian lowered her voice. "I've seen this before. It's called an adverse possession claim. It's rare, but if she's filing it, she's trying to prove she's been maintaining and occupying the house long enough to claim ownership." My throat went dry. "You mean, she's trying to take my home legally?" "Yes," Vivian said, her voice cracking. "And she's almost halfway there." Vivian met me the next morning at a small cafe near the courthouse. I hadn't been there in years, not since Theodore passed, but the smell of brewed coffee still carried that same comfort, though comfort was the last thing I felt. She slid a manila folder across the table. "I shouldn't even be showing you this," she said, glancing around, "but you need to see it for yourself." Inside were copies of property forms stamped with county seals. My name appeared on several pages, neat, clear, and forged. "This one," she whispered, pointing to a particular document, "is a deed transfer authorization. It's backdated 6 months ago. Kendra filed it, claiming you signed it while you were recovering from surgery." My eyes scanned the lines, catching phrases I barely understood. Occupancy claim, power of interest, partial possession rights. "She even filed for mail redirection," Vivian continued. "That's how she's intercepting your property statements." The world around me faded. I could hear the clinking of cups, the low chatter of other customers, but it all felt distant. My name was being used to erase me. How long has she been planning this? I asked quietly. Vivian exhaled, shaking her head. Long enough to make it look legitimate. And with Ethan listed as a co-resident, it strengthens her case. She's building evidence that this house isn't yours alone anymore. I pressed my hands together to stop their trembling. For months she had been rewriting my life, one paper at a time. Vivian, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't just stealing my house, she was stealing my life. The drive home from the cafe felt endless. I couldn't even hear the sound of the tires against the road, just Vivian's words looping in my mind. She's almost halfway there. I parked in front of the house, staring at the windows that once held warmth. Now, they felt like eyes watching me back. Inside, Kendra was arranging flowers on the table, humming softly to herself. She looked up when she saw me. "You're home early," she said. Her voice was light, her smile rehearsed. "I had coffee with Vivian," I replied evenly. "She works at the courthouse now." For the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of unease behind her eyes. Then it vanished, replaced by that same careful charm. "That's lovely," she said, returning to her bouquet. I watched her hands, steady and sure, and realized how calculated every movement had been. Every word of kindness, every small decision, had led to this a plan years in the making. That night, I sat in my room with the copies of the forged documents spread across my bed. Each one felt like a betrayal carved into paper. The signature looked exactly like mine, even the curl of the E. I felt the tears coming, but I refused to let them fall. Not this time. "You want to erase me," I whispered into the silence, "but I'm not gone yet." Somewhere between heartbreak and rage, something new began to form a quiet, focused fire. I didn't yet know what I would do, but for the first time in months, I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't wait for mercy. I woke the next morning before sunrise. The air was still, heavy with that quiet tension that lingers before a storm. For months, I had moved through my home like a shadow, careful not to disturb the peace Kendra pretended to keep, but now I saw her version of peace for what it was, submission disguised as order. I folded the papers Vivian had given me and tucked them into the back of my notebook. That book, once filled with small notes of my daily routines, had now become something different, a record of theft, deception, and evidence. Downstairs, I found Kendra in the kitchen. She greeted me as if nothing had changed. "Morning, Elara. How did you sleep?" I looked at her calmly and said, "I didn't." For the first time, she hesitated. Maybe she felt the shift, the quiet edge in my tone. I didn't argue or accuse. I didn't have to. She'd see it soon enough, the difference between weakness and restraint. That afternoon, I called Vivian from my small kitchen upstairs. "I need a lawyer," I said. "I already have someone in mind," she replied softly. "He's discreet and he doesn't scare easily." As I hung up, I looked around my tiny refuge, my kettle, my tea, my quiet resistance, and I realized this room wasn't just my cage anymore. It was my command post. She thought she had taken everything, but she hadn't taken me. Not yet. Like this if you've ever seen greed disguise itself as love. Because when betrayal wears a smile, it thinks it's already won. That's its first mistake. Vivian introduced me to Mr. Wallace a few days later, a calm man in his 60s, with steady eyes and a voice that didn't rush. His office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish, the kind of place where truth felt heavier than the air itself. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, glancing over the documents, "you're dealing with deliberate fraud. The signatures were copied from old authorization forms, probably ones you signed during your surgery. Clever and cruel." I sat across from him, hands folded tightly. "Can I prove it?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, "but it won't be loud or quick. People like her count on noise, on emotional reactions. What wins here is patience, not fury." His words stayed with me. Patience, not fury. For the first time in months, I felt something like direction, the sense that I wasn't powerless anymore. "We'll start with documentation," he continued. "Every conversation, every interaction, every expense. Keep records. Small details can break big lies." I nodded slowly, the pieces fitting together. I didn't need to match Kendra's cruelty. I just needed to watch, record, and wait. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the sharpening of your sword. I bought a new notebook on my way home from Mr. Wallace's office, plain brown cover. No patterns, no markings. I didn't want anything pretty. I wanted something honest. Each night, after the house went quiet, I'd sit at my small desk and write. I recorded the time Kendra entered my room without knocking, the days she withheld my mail, the phone calls she made when she thought I was asleep. Every word was dated, every observation exact. I even began collecting small bits of evidence, photographs of my personal items packed away, recordings of conversations where she explained why I couldn't access certain things. Nothing dramatic, just small truths, the kind that speak louder than shouting. The journal became my anchor. It reminded me that, though I'd been stripped of control, I wasn't stripped of awareness. That difference was everything. Ethan barely noticed my quiet changes. Kendra, though, sensed something. She began checking in more often, her smile a little tighter. "You're keeping busy, I see," she said once, glancing at my notebook. "Just writing memories," I replied, closing it gently. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was writing memories, just not the kind she'd want remembered. And through it all, I stayed patient. Every word I wrote was a brick in the wall. She didn't know I was building a wall of truth that would stand long after her lies fell apart. Patience, I reminded myself, is what separates the quiet from the forgotten. I began to study her the same way she'd studied me, with quiet observation. Every morning, Kendra performed her routine with military precision, checking mail, locking the pantry, updating her phone calendar. I memorized it all. Mr. Wallace's advice echoed in my mind. She's building a story. All you have to do is gather proof of the real one. So I watched. When she signed packages in my name, I took photos. When she logged into my bank app to help pay bills, I noted the time and her excuse. When she used my old checkbook to pay for her personal purchases, I recorded every amount. I learned to nod, to thank her sweetly, to make her think her control still worked. What she didn't realize was that the more she acted, the more evidence she gave me. Some nights, I would sit with my cup of tea and replay her words in my head. "I'm only protecting what's ours." She always said ours. The word used to sting, now it fueled me. Vivian and I began meeting quietly, passing notes through her car window near the grocery store. She'd collect copies of my recordings and entries, sealing them in dated envelopes. Each one was a step closer to reclaiming what was mine. I was no longer the frail woman she pitied. I was her mirror, calm, polite, and dangerously observant. By pretending to stay small, I'd learned her biggest secret. She only felt powerful when I stayed silent. Soon, that silence would speak louder than her lies ever could. By early spring, the tension in the house had changed. Kendra still carried herself like the queen of a kingdom she didn't own, but there was something new in her eyes, uncertainty. She couldn't quite place what had shifted, only that I no longer flinched. I smiled more often, asked small, harmless questions about her day, and spent long hours in my room with the door closed. She thought I was retreating again. In truth, I was preparing. Mr. Wallace had reviewed everything I'd gathered. "This is more than enough," he told me. "You've documented a pattern of exploitation and fraud. Once we file, she won't see it coming." The words gave me peace, not the fragile kind that trembles, but the steady sort that comes when you finally stop running from the truth. Some evenings, I'd sit on the porch when she wasn't home, the same steps where I once felt powerless. This time, the air felt lighter. I wasn't the woman begging for a key anymore. I held the keys she didn't even know existed: truth, proof, and timing. I whispered to the wind, "Theodore, you'd be proud." I didn't scream. I didn't break. I waited. Comment, patience, if you believe karma never misses. Because revenge doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needs timing. If you're watching this and still haven't subscribed, ask yourself, what if it happens to someone you love and you don't know how to fight back? Don't wait to learn the hard way. Subscribe now before your silence costs you everything. What came next wasn't anger, it was justice, carefully planned and long overdue. It was Kendra's idea to host the dinner party. She said it was time to celebrate stability, her favorite phrase when she wanted to flaunt control. Ethan agreed, though I could see the hesitation in his eyes. The guest list was short. A few of Kendra's coworkers from the real estate firm and one of Ethan's old friends. It would be, as she described it, an evening to remember. I smiled politely when she told me, pretending to be pleased. "Of course, dear," I said. "I'll stay out of your way." That week, the house buzzed with preparation. She ordered expensive wine, rearranged the furniture yet again, and instructed me not to stress myself by helping. I obeyed, quietly observing, storing every detail in the notebook Mr. Wallace now called our strongest evidence. What Kendra didn't know was that this dinner fell just 2 days before our court filing. Mr. Wallace had timed it perfectly. She would raise her glass to victory, unaware the ground beneath her was already shifting. I watched her set the table that evening, silverware gleaming under soft light. She hummed a song, something upbeat, hollow. And as she arranged the flowers in the center vase, I thought to myself, let her have her moment. Every queen deserves one final toast before her crown slips. She raised her glass to toast her victory, unaware I'd already written her ending. The morning of the dinner, I woke before the Sunday. The house was silent, the kind of silence that waits for something. I slipped out of bed and opened the small box. Theodore had built years ago, carved oak, worn smooth by time. Inside was my secret, an old brass key. Kendra thought she had changed every lock, but Theodore had installed one hidden latch decades earlier, a safety feature he never mentioned to anyone but me. I had kept that key through every storm of my life, and now, it was more than a memory. It was a reminder that I was never truly locked out. I placed it carefully in my coat pocket, next to a folded note from Mr. Wallace, confirming that the court filing was set for the next morning. Once submitted, ownership would be legally frozen until investigation. Kendra wouldn't see it coming. In the basement, I checked the breaker panel, another small secret she didn't understand. I'd watched her brag about how modernized she made the wiring, but the main switch still worked the old way. One pull, and the entire house would go dark. I smiled faintly, running my hand along the panel. Theodore used to say, "Always know how to shut off the lights in your own house." Back then, he meant it literally. Now, it meant something far deeper. By evening, I would be ready. Every detail was in place, the key, the filing, the plan. And when the lights went out, I wouldn't just reclaim a house, I'd reclaim myself. By dusk, the house looked immaculate. The table shimmered under warm light, the wine glasses catching tiny glints of gold. Kendra wore a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly pinned. She moved through the room like a hostess born for attention, her voice confident, her laughter a little too loud. The guests arrived one by one, colleagues with polished smiles, all eager to please. Ethan greeted them kindly, but without energy, as though he were there out of duty, not joy. I stayed near the hallway, unnoticed, my presence blending with the furniture she hadn't yet replaced. "It's so generous of you to open your home like this," one woman said to Kendra. "Well," Kendra replied, beaming, "it feels wonderful to finally make it our own." The words hit like a small blade. I glanced at Ethan, waiting for him to flinch, to correct her, but he only nodded weakly. Maybe he didn't want another argument. Maybe he didn't believe there was anything left to defend. I carried a tray of bread quietly through the dining room, playing the part of the harmless elder. Kendra smiled sweetly at me in front of her guests, the perfect performance. "Elara insists on helping," she said lightly. "She's so attached to the place, you know." The laughter that followed was soft, almost polite, but it rang louder than thunder in my ears. I turned, walked back toward the kitchen, and whispered to myself, "Enjoy your moment, dear. It's your last one under these lights. Stay till the end, you won't believe what happened next." The laughter from the dining room swelled, then faded as I slipped down the back hallway. My footsteps made no sound against the old carpet. Theodore had chosen one of the few things Kendra hadn't replaced because it wasn't worth the effort. That thought made me smile. For once, her neglect worked in my favor. I reached the basement door, turned the knob, and descended slowly. The air was cool and still. My fingers brushed along the wall until they found the breaker panel. I took a long breath, then whispered softly, "For you, Theodore." With one firm pull, the house went dark. A chorus of startled gasps echoed from above, chairs scraping, glasses shattering, confused voices rising in the dark. I waited 3 beats, long enough for panic to settle, then climbed back upstairs. When I stepped into the dining room doorway, the faint light from the street lamps framed the scene, Kendra frozen in the middle of her perfect party, clutching a useless candle lighter. Her guests looked around awkwardly, uncertain whom to follow. "Is everything all right?" I asked softly, my silhouette steady against the faint glow. She turned toward me, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "The power's out. I'll handle it." "No need," I said, holding up the old brass key. The metal caught the dim light just enough for her to see it and understand. Her expression faltered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. In that moment, she realized something she never expected. The woman she'd dismissed had been waiting, watching, preparing, and the lights weren't the only thing she was about to lose. The first few seconds after the lights went out were pure confusion. A glass broke. Someone gasped. Then came the shuffle of chairs and the low murmur of uneasy voices. "What's happening?" one of Kendra's coworkers asked, their tone rising. "It's just the breaker," she said quickly, her voice tight. "Stay calm, everyone." I stood near the doorway, watching her fumble for control. The confidence she wore like armor was cracking in the dark. She struck a match, but her hand trembled. The flame flickered, lighting her face in small, nervous flashes. Ethan found his way toward her, holding his phone's dim light. "Mom, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said softly, my calm slicing through the confusion. I just needed the house quiet for a moment. Everyone turned toward me. Even in the half-light, I could feel their eyes searching for understanding. "Kendra," I continued, stepping closer, "you've had this home shining for months, but sometimes things look clearer when the lights go out." The match in her hand burned low, the flame kissing her fingers. She dropped it with a gasp, and for a brief second, the room was silent again, heavy, waiting. Justice doesn't always scream it, sometimes walks downstairs in silence. I took another step forward, my voice steady, measured the voice of someone who had waited long enough. "I'd like to thank you all for coming," I said, my eyes on the guests. "It's been a pleasure having you in my home." Kendra let out a nervous laugh. "Elara, please." "No," I interrupted gently. "You've spoken enough." I reached into my pocket and drew out the envelope Mr. Wallace had prepared. The sound of the paper sliding free was louder than her heartbeat. "Since we're celebrating, I thought tonight was the right time to share something important." I placed the envelope on the table, right beside her untouched wine glass. Inside are copies of legal documents filed this morning. They show every forgery, every signature you faked, and every claim you made to take this home from me. A murmur swept through the guests. One of them whispered, "Forgery." Kendra's face went pale. "This is absurd." She's confused. Ethan spoke then, his voice breaking through the tension. "Kendra, is it true?" She froze. For the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. I turned toward him, not with anger, but with sorrow. "She's been building a life on my name, Ethan. Even the deed you thought I signed, it wasn't mine." I opened the folder just enough for the guests to see the stamped seals, the lawyer's signature, the proof. Everything is already in motion. Tomorrow, she'll answer to the same laws she twisted. The quiet that followed was deeper than any shouting could have been. Kendra's hand trembled around her glass, the last pretense of control slipping through her fingers like wine on the tablecloth. The tension in the room thickened, sharp enough to cut through the silence. No one moved. Kendra's co-workers shifted awkwardly in their seats, avoiding her eyes. Ethan stood between us, torn, confused, but finally seeing what I had known all along. Kendra reached for the envelope, but I stepped forward and placed my hand over it. "Not this time," I said softly. "You've taken enough that didn't belong to you." I turned toward the door and twisted the latch, the same one Theodore had installed decades ago, the one that still obeyed my hand alone. The click echoed through the house. "You locked us in?" one of the guests whispered, uneasy. "Just for a moment," I replied. "She's kept me locked out of my own home for months. Tonight, I wanted her to understand how that feels." Kendra's composure cracked. "Elara, this is ridiculous. Open the door." "No," I said quietly. "You'll leave when I'm done speaking." I walked past her and placed the brass key on the table between us. "This belongs to me not because of a paper, not because of a title, But because I built this life with love, with my own hands, you tried to replace that with greed. Kendra's lips parted as if to argue, but the words never came. She looked around at her guests, their faces lined with disbelief and judgment. The empire she'd built from my trust was crumbling, one truth at a time. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply stood tall and said, "Now you know how it feels to be shut out of a life that was never yours." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. No one dared move. The only sound was the faint ticking of the dining room clock, a quiet reminder that time had finally caught up to her. Kendra stood frozen, her perfect posture gone, her voice trembling. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have," I said calmly. "The filings are submitted. The police will visit in the morning. You'll answer for every document you forged, every lie you told in my name." Her guests looked at her with wide eyes, piecing together the truth. One of them, the same woman who'd praised her generosity earlier, muttered, "I can't believe it." Ethan finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Mom, I didn't know." I touched his arm gently. "I know you didn't. You believed her because you wanted peace, but sometimes peace needs a little noise to be heard. Also," I walked to the door, slid the brass key into the lock, and turned it slowly. The sound of it clicking open felt like a heartbeat restarting. I opened the door wide and said quietly, "You can leave now." Kendra didn't move at first. Her pride wouldn't let her. But as the weight of everyone's silence pressed in, she gathered her coat with shaking hands and stepped outside without a word. I turned to the guests, still seated, unsure of what to do. "Dinner's over," I said, steady but kind. "Thank you for witnessing the truth." As the door closed behind her, I let out the breath I'd been holding for months. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to whisper. Comment, "Justice served if you loved this moment." The next morning, sunlight spilled gently through the windows, the first light that truly felt like mine in a long time. I brewed coffee in my small kitchen upstairs, the way I had every morning during those months of quiet captivity. But this time, the air was different. It carried peace instead of tension. I heard footsteps outside. Through the curtain, I saw the patrol car pull up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out, polite but firm. Kendra stood on the porch, her arms crossed, pretending calm she no longer possessed. Ethan stood beside her, silent. His face was pale, not angry, just lost. I didn't go outside. I didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. The officers handed her a folded notice, the official copy of the legal injunction. It froze all ownership transfers and listed the fraud investigation under her name. From where I stood, I saw her glance toward the house, her jaw tight, her eyes darting between the papers and the locked door she no longer commanded. That moment, I realized something simple. Justice doesn't require spectacle. Sometimes, it just arrives wearing a uniform and carrying paperwork. The car drove away slowly. The silence that followed was sweet, like the pause between thunder and clear sky. The news traveled quickly, as it always does in small towns. By the end of the week, whispers had reached every corner of Kendra's world, her office, her friends, her online circles. The same people who once envied her perfect life were now talking about court filings and forged signatures. Vivian called to update me. "Her firm has suspended her," she said quietly. "They're launching an internal audit. It doesn't look good for her." I didn't celebrate. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Truth has a way of finding daylight," I told her. Ethan came by that afternoon, standing at the doorway where so much had been taken from me. His shoulders sagged under the weight of everything he hadn't seen. "Mom," he said softly, "I can't believe what she did. I thought I was protecting you." I reached out, touching his arm. "You were trying to keep the peace, son. We all do that until we realize silence helps the wrong side." He nodded, tears threatening but refusing to fall. "I filed for separation," he whispered. "I can't stay married to someone like that." The words were heavy with sorrow, not vengeance. I saw the boy I'd raised in him again, decent, kind, finally awake. As he left, I looked around the house that was once filled with fear. The locks were changed again, but this time the keys rested safely in my drawer. Kendra had built her world on control and lies, and both had finally turned to dust. In the weeks that followed, I started to reclaim my house, one quiet room at a time. I opened windows that hadn't felt fresh air in months. I took down curtains she'd hung and replaced them with the old lace ones Theodore loved. Dust became proof of survival, not neglect. The cameras came down first. Each one clicked softly as I unscrewed it, placing it in a box labeled, "For Evidence." I didn't throw them away. I wanted to keep reminders of how far patience could reach when guided by purpose. I moved my small kitchen back downstairs, setting the kettle on its rightful counter. The scent of cinnamon bread filled the air, the same way it had when life was simpler. For the first time in months, I ate breakfast at the dining table alone, yet completely at peace. Sometimes, I caught myself pausing mid-step, half expecting to hear her voice behind me, but all I heard was silence, and this time, it was beautiful. Vivian visited one afternoon, carrying a small bouquet. "Feels like the house is breathing again," she said with a smile. "It is," I replied. It took a while for it to remember who it belongs to. We sat together drinking tea, sunlight pooling around us. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic tears, just peace. Healing, I realized, doesn't arrive with noise. It slips in quietly when the fight is finally done. And sometimes, the greatest act of revenge is simply living well after someone tried to take everything. Some nights, I still sit on the porch steps with a blanket around my shoulders and think about everything that happened. The house is quiet again, but not the lonely kind of quiet, the peaceful kind that comes after truth has done its work. I've learned that betrayal doesn't always begin with cruelty. Sometimes it starts with smiles, gentle words, and the promise of help. And by the time you realize the cost, the thief isn't at your door, they're inside your home. But I've also learned that strength doesn't always come with shouting or fists. Sometimes it looks like patience, pen, and proof. It looks like faith that time will reveal what pride tries to hide. People often ask what kept me from losing hope through it all. My answer is simple. Theodore built this house with his hands, but he built me with his love. And that foundation doesn't crack easily. Ethan visits often now. We share coffee in the mornings, talk about old times, and laugh like we used to. The space between us feels honest again. Kendra hasn't returned. The courts will handle what's left of her story. I don't wish her pain, only understanding. Because some lessons can't be avoided, they have to be lived. I close my eyes, listening to the wind slip through the old oak trees, and whisper to myself, home isn't just where you live, it's where you finally rest. Subscribe so you never miss how wisdom wins again. The first night after everything ended, I sat in the living room with every light off, just listening. The house had a sound I hadn't heard in a long time, not silence, but stillness. Real peace hums in its own quiet way, like a heart that finally stops racing. I ran my hand over the old wooden table, tracing the same scratches Theodore made while fixing a chair one winter evening. The marks had always annoyed me back then. Now, they felt sacred reminders that love leaves fingerprints even long after it's gone. For months, I had been living like a ghost in my own story. But that night, I realized something simple. Peace doesn't return all at once. It comes back one sound at a time. The ticking of the clock. The creak of the stairs. The sigh of wind through an open window. I thought of Kendra, not with hate, but with pity. A woman who mistook ownership for love and control for power. Have you ever taken back what someone tried to steal from your peace? It changes you not into something harder, but into something stronger. People often ask how I managed to keep calm through it all, how I didn't shout, break, or give up. The truth is, I almost did. There were nights I wanted to pack a bag and walk away, to let her win just so I could stop hurting. But something inside me refused. Maybe it was Theodore's memory. Maybe it was every grandmother who ever had to fight quietly just to be heard. I learned that patience isn't weakness. It's a kind of power most people underestimate. Kendra mistook my silence for surrender. She thought control came from volume and paperwork, but real strength? It comes from knowing the difference between reacting and responding. If I had fought her rage with rage, I would have lost everything, not just my home, but my peace. So I waited, I planned, and I trusted that truth has its own clock. There's a strange beauty in letting time do what anger can't. Justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up quietly, carrying proof instead of pride. So if you're listening to this, wondering how to face the people who wronged you. Start with patience. Document, remember, and hold your ground. Revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about correction. It's the moment the scales balance again. Because when you take back your dignity, you don't just win, you heal. Join the Her Revenge family, where every story reminds us that wisdom always wins. These days, my mornings are slow and gentle. I wake to the sound of birds outside the kitchen window, the same window Kendra once kept locked. I pour my coffee, sit at the table, and let the light spill across the floorboards. Theodore laid with his own hands. Peace, I've learned, doesn't roar back into your life. It tiptoes in, sits beside you quietly, and waits for you to notice it. I used to think revenge was about making someone else suffer, but it's not. It's about reclaiming your story, your voice, and the calm they tried to take away. Some evenings, Ethan visits. We cook together, laugh about old memories, and share comfortable silence when words aren't needed. There's no tension in his eyes anymore, just understanding. That's its own kind of victory, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Before I sleep, I always walk to the front door and hold that brass key in my hand. I don't need to lock it every night, but I do anyway. It reminds me that protection isn't just about doors, it's about boundaries, choices, and knowing when to stand still and when to strike. The house no longer feels heavy. It hums again, the way it did when love filled every corner. That's the sound of peace. Not silence, peace. Don't just scroll past this one, darling, because next time, it could be your story we're telling. Subscribe now, or at least tell me in the comments why you'd rather stay unprotected. And as for me, I'll be right here, waiting to share the next story. Another reminder that wisdom, in the end, always wins.